The Fukushima disaster was not just an accident. It was a turning point, a systemic warning about the risks inherent in nuclear energy, the limits of regulatory oversight, and the consequences of technological overconfidence. Yet, despite decades of lessons, 2026 marks the point where nations are quietly, deliberately restarting reactors once considered too dangerous to operate. This is not accidental. It is the predictable outcome of energy scarcity, geopolitical pressure, and economic necessity. Globally, demand for energy is growing faster than supply, particularly in Asia, Europe, and North America. Renewable capacity is expanding, but intermittency, storage limitations, and cost constraints prevent renewables from fully replacing fossil fuels. Nuclear energy, despite its history, offers scale and reliability that few alternatives match. Governments face a stark choice: continue under energy constraints or take calculated risk to meet growing demand. By 2026, multiple nations are restarting reactors, citing necessity over fear. But the controversy is not just political, it is structural. The first consideration is scale. Restarting a single reactor may seem minor, but systems operate interdependently. Energy grids, cooling infrastructure, waste management, and regulatory frameworks must all function simultaneously. Small miscalculations cascade into larger systemic risk. Fukushima was not a failure of one plant. It was a failure of interlinked systems operating under stress. Each restart reintroduces these risks at scale across multiple countries, with millions depending on flawless execution. Economic pressure drives the urgency. Fossil fuel prices remain volatile, supply chains are constrained, and climate goals demand reduction of carbon emissions. Nuclear energy promises low carbon, high output power, an attractive solution to governments facing growing energy deficits. But this economic incentive masks structural fragility. Reactors that remained offline for years degrade over time. Safety systems require meticulous maintenance. Staff shortages, regulatory fatigue, and political lobbying create conditions where mistakes are not improbable. They are inevitable if oversight falters. Public perception adds a second layer of pressure. Societies remember Fukushima vividly. Images of devastated coastlines, radiation exposure, and displaced populations remain etched in collective memory. Restarting reactors triggers protest, litigation, and political backlash. Governments attempt to manage narrative, emphasizing safety improvements, technological upgrades, and regulatory rigor. Yet perception is a force in itself. Fear influences markets, investment, and policy choices. Controversy is not accidental. It is systemic. Geopolitics magnifies the challenge. Nations with energy scarcity depend on imports, creating vulnerability to external shocks. Countries with nuclear capability gain strategic leverage. Control of energy supply translates into political influence. This creates pressure not only domestically, but internationally. Restart decisions are never purely national. They have cross-border implications, influencing trade negotiations, alliances, and energy diplomacy. The pattern mirrors historical systemic risk. Large-scale, high-stakes technology operates under 4 phases: setup, operationalization, stress accumulation, and crisis potential. Phase 1 setup involves design, construction, and initial regulatory approval. Phase 2, operationalization, is the period of routine functioning and incremental upgrades. Phase 3, stress accumulation, occurs as aging, wear, and external pressure interact. Phase 4, crisis potential, is when small errors, extreme events, or systemic shocks can propagate uncontrollably. Fukushima followed this trajectory. Restarted reactors decades later are beginning the same cycle anew. Historical precedent reinforces the urgency. Post-Fukushima, Japan shut down almost all reactors, dramatically increasing reliance on imports and fossil fuels. France, Germany, and the United States reevaluated their nuclear programs, balancing energy security with safety concerns. Every nation faced the same trade-off: accept risk or compromise energy stability. Today, similar pressures are amplified by higher population density, more complex grids, and geopolitical tensions. Operational risk cannot be ignored. Aging reactors face material fatigue, outdated safety systems, and limited staff trained for emergency scenarios. Even minor human error in maintenance, cooling, or monitoring can escalate quickly. Cascading failure like Fukushima is not hypothetical. It is embedded in the operational architecture. The restart of multiple reactors simultaneously increases the probability of correlated failures. Verified. Financial pressure compounds risk. Nuclear energy is expensive to operate and maintain. Governments subsidize operations to prevent immediate collapse of energy supply. Subsidies, in turn, create political dependency, incentivize lobbying, and reduce independent oversight. Markets may reward energy production while systemic fragility grows unnoticed. Investors often see output, not structural risk. Institutions operate under the illusion of control. But complexity and interdependence ensure that small stressors can propagate uncontrollably. Public health is intertwined with operational stability. Nuclear accidents have long-term environmental consequences: contamination, forced evacuation, and disruption of agriculture, fisheries, and local economies. Restarting reactors under societal pressure tests both technological and regulatory resilience. Every decision is a balance between meeting energy needs today and mitigating potential catastrophe tomorrow. Undeniable, the scale of the restart is unprecedented. Japan, Korea, France, and emerging nuclear nations plan multiple reactors simultaneously. Each country has unique regulatory frameworks, safety culture, and resource constraints. Interlinkage between grids, international fuel markets, and emergency response coordination amplifies risk. Even if each reactor is individually safe, the system-wide risk is magnified by interdependency. Energy, scarcity, economics, public perception, geopolitics, operational risk, and systemic interdependence converge. Restart decisions are no longer isolated. They are structural. They follow a predictable mechanism where short-term necessity clashes with long-term fragility. Those in power understand the stakes. A stable energy supply preserves economic growth, political control, and national security. But the margin for error shrinks with each reactor restarted. The lesson is clear. Fukushima was not a singular event. It was a systemic warning. The restart cycle is not accidental. It is predictable. Risk is embedded, inevitable, and amplified by scale, complexity, and human factors. The question for 2026 is not whether something will go wrong, but where, when, and how. Understanding this system transforms perception. Public debate often focuses on politics, emotion, and narrative. Analysts debate cost, output, and carbon reduction. But structural risk operates independently, does not respond to reassurance, media coverage, or short-term statistics. It responds to engineering, operational integrity, regulatory rigor, and systemic interdependence. For those observing carefully, the restart presents both danger and opportunity. Danger lies in underestimating systemic fragility and overestimating operational certainty. Opportunity lies in understanding energy dynamics, geopolitical leverage, and market implications before they fully manifest. Awareness allows positioning, adaptation, and informed decision-making. The restart of Fukushima reactors is the beginning of a systemic cycle, a cycle of necessity, risk, and controversy. History, operational mechanics, and geopolitical realities converge to create conditions where crisis is not improbable. It is inevitable if systems are mismanaged. The next part will analyze operational and geopolitical stress in detail, exploring how simultaneous restarts amplify systemic fragility, affect global markets, and provoke both controversy and opportunity. If Part 1 introduced the systemic warning, Part 2 explains the operational, technical, and geopolitical stress created by restarting reactors once considered too dangerous to operate. Because scale alone does not capture the full story. It is interdependence, fragility, and human oversight that determine whether risk becomes crisis. Operational stress begins the moment a reactor comes online after years of inactivity. Reactors are not machines you simply switch on. Fuel assemblies, control rods, cooling systems, and emergency mechanisms must all operate in precise synchrony. Any deviation, no matter how small, can propagate. Maintenance staff, must adapt to updated procedures, new regulations, and aging equipment. The human factor, often underestimated, introduces uncertainty. Even the most skilled teams cannot eliminate the reality that decades of inactivity degrade components in institutional memory. Check. Technical challenges are compounded by infrastructure interdependence. Cooling systems require uninterrupted water supply. Electricity grids must balance load dynamically. Containment measures must remain airtight under extreme conditions. In 2026, multiple reactors in multiple nations are being restarted simultaneously. That means grids across Japan, South Korea, France, and emerging nuclear nations will experience overlapping stress periods. Each reactor adds marginal risk, but cumulatively, the probability of systemic failure rises exponentially. Verified. A single reactor shutdown or accident does not exist in isolation. Grid operators must respond in real time to avoid cascading blackouts. Fuel supply chains are under pressure, with enrichment, transportation, and storage all vulnerable to disruption. Even minor delays or miscalculations can ripple across regions, affecting industries, commerce, and households. Energy dependence is not just national, it is global. One disruption in a key country can influence energy pricing and availability worldwide. Geopolitical stress compounds, operational fragility. Nations restarting nuclear reactors operate under immense external pressure. Energy scarcity, trade dependence, and diplomatic obligations create conditions where mistakes are politically costly. Countries with strategic energy needs may prioritize output over safety, subtly compressing margins for error. This creates a systemic tension between operational prudence and geopolitical necessity. Undeniable. Consider Japan. The government faces domestic opposition, regulatory scrutiny, and energy demand pressure simultaneously. Restarting multiple reactors involves balancing local community concerns with national energy security and international commitments. This is not hypothetical. Historical protests, litigation, public distrust mean even minor errors trigger political backlash, potentially slowing emergency response and complicating operational decisions. France faces different stress. Nuclear contributes over 70% of domestic electricity. Reactors were offline during maintenance cycles or extended shutdowns, creating gaps in grid capacity. Restarting these reactors simultaneously to meet energy demand risks coordination errors, particularly in cooling systems and turbine management. Grid stability is nonlinear. Small disturbances can cascade, creating stress far beyond the affected plant. South Korea and China demonstrate another dimension: regional competition. Restart decisions are influenced not only by domestic demand, but also by regional energy leverage. Control over nuclear output translates into political influence, negotiation power, and strategic positioning. Mismanagement, accident, or delay affects not only domestic energy supply, but also regional diplomatic balance. Beyond operation, technical fragility is amplified by aging infrastructure. Reactors designed decades ago face material fatigue, corroded piping, and legacy control systems. Modern safety standards may have been retrofitted, but integration is imperfect. Each upgrade introduces potential for human error, software incompatibility, or mechanical mismatch. The more reactors restarted simultaneously, the higher the probability that minor issues interact in unpredictable ways. Human oversight remains the limiting factor. Experienced staff are fewer than required due to retirements, regulatory constraints, and resource limitations. Training programs are robust, but cannot fully replicate decades of operational experience lost during shutdowns. Cognitive overload, miscommunication, and procedural lapses are inevitable under high stress. This is where the system's resilience is tested, not only by technology, but by human capacity. Economic incentives exacerbate stress. Energy demand, volatile fossil fuel prices, and government pressure create a situation where production is prioritized over caution. Subsidies and contracts may encourage rapid restarts, even when optimal maintenance schedules are not completed. Financial reward structures can indirectly compromise operational prudence. Markets respond to output, not system integrity, reinforcing incentives that increase systemic fragility. Geopolitical and operational stress intersect during emergencies, natural disasters, supply chain disruption, or cyber attacks. Targeting control systems introduce compounding stress. Nuclear energy is highly interdependent. Small shocks amplify across the network. Fukushima itself was caused not by a single failure, but by an interplay of earthquake, tsunami, and insufficient redundancy. Restarting multiple reactors decades later increases the number of points where similar compounding failures can occur. Public perception amplifies the consequences of operational or technical errors. Even minor incidents trigger media scrutiny, litigation, and international attention. Governments may delay disclosure or minimize the issue to avoid panic, which paradoxically reduces transparency and slows response. Social trust becomes a critical variable in operational stress. High anxiety can pressure regulators and operators into rushed decisions or defer structural improvements. Unintentionally increasing risk. The interconnectedness of global nuclear energy means that stress is transnational. Fuel supply is international. Safety standards vary by country. Regulatory transparency differs widely. An accident in one jurisdiction may influence international trade, fuel markets, and energy diplomacy. Risk is not contained by borders. The restart cycle in 2026 is therefore both operationally and geopolitically systemic. In addition, nuclear waste management remains a latent risk. Restarted reactors produce spent fuel, requiring secure, long-term storage. Any lapses in handling, transportation, or storage infrastructure create environmental and health consequences that ripple far beyond the plant itself. Operational stress is not only measured by electricity output, but by the integrity of the entire life cycle of nuclear energy. The pattern is predictable. History, systemic interdependence, and operational mechanics all suggest that restarting reactors simultaneously in multiple nations increases. Probability of stress propagation, small errors, aging infrastructure, human oversight limitations, and geopolitical pressure combine to create cascading potential failures. This is not alarmism, it's a structural reality. Check. The restart is controversial not because of ideology alone, but because the system is inherently fragile. Critics cite past disasters, operational uncertainty, and public safety. Proponents cite energy demand, low carbon output, and economic necessity. Both positions are valid, but the tension between necessity and risk is inescapable. Restarting reactors magnifies this tension globally, politically, and operationally. For those observing, the lesson is clear. Understanding operational, technical, and geopolitical stress allows for informed analysis and strategic foresight. Monitoring reactor startups, grid load, regulatory reports, and energy diplomacy signals systemic risk before it manifests in crises. Verified. The next part will explore environmental health and long-term societal consequences, including how controversy, risk perception, and structural fragility intersect, and what that means for nations, markets, and populations worldwide. If Part 2 revealed operational and geopolitical stress, Part 3 delves into environmental, health, and long-term societal consequences of restarting reactors once considered too dangerous to operate. Because the risk is not confined to electricity grids or energy markets, it permeates ecosystems, communities, and public trust. Nuclear energy operates in a complex web of dependencies. Radiation containment, cooling systems, waste storage, and structural integrity are not separate variables. They interact. A failure in any one node can propagate through multiple systems. Fukushima demonstrated this vividly. A natural disaster triggered a cascade of technological and human failures, amplifying risk far beyond the initial incident. Restarting reactors decades later reintroduces these vulnerabilities, often under heightened population density and environmental sensitivity. Check. Environmental consequences are multifaceted. Cooling water systems draw from rivers, lakes, and oceans, creating thermal pollution that affects aquatic ecosystems. Any accident, even minor leaks, can release radioactive isotopes, contaminating soil, groundwater, and marine life. Fish and agricultural products may accumulate radiation. leading to economic disruption and health hazards that persist for decades. Cumulative exposure is often invisible at first, making early detection and mitigation critical. Verified. Waste management remains a critical concern. Spent fuel must be stored securely for decades, if not centuries. Restarted reactors generate additional radioactive waste, straining existing storage infrastructure. Temporary solutions, such as pools or dry casks, introduce further risk if not rigorously maintained. Human error, regulatory lapses, or natural disasters can compromise containment, creating long-term environmental and societal consequences. Health consequences extend beyond direct radiation exposure. Stress, displacement, and social disruption impact mental health. Communities near reactors experience chronic anxiety, affecting economic productivity and social cohesion. Evacuation plans, if implemented, disrupt education, employment, and infrastructure. Even without an accident, the perception of risk imposes tangible societal costs, influencing behavior, migration, and policy decisions. Controversy is inseparable from these consequences. Public opinion remains highly sensitive to nuclear risk, shaped by historical memory, media framing, and trust in authorities. Restart decisions trigger litigation, protest, and political pressure. Governments must navigate a delicate balance: energy security versus public safety, economic necessity versus social acceptance. The political cost of error amplifies operational stress, creating feedback loops where fear and necessity collide. Global implications are profound. Countries importing nuclear fuel or technology are indirectly exposed to operational risk elsewhere. A mismanaged restart in one nation can influence international fuel markets, energy prices, and diplomatic negotiations. Contamination does not respect borders. Fisheries, trade routes, and environmental agreements create transnational consequences that extend far beyond local populations. Undeniable long-term societal impact is equally critical. Displaced populations, economic disruption, and environmental degradation can persist for generations. Property values decline, industries collapse, and trust in institutions erodes. Communities near reactors face enduring uncertainty which affects education, entrepreneurship, and demographic stability. Societal stress amplifies economic fragility, reinforcing the feedback loop between operational risk and public consequence. Cumulative risk compounds over time. Even reactors with upgraded safety systems face the reality of aging infrastructure, complex interdependencies, and human limitations. Regulatory oversight may be stringent, but enforcement is uneven. Systems designed decades ago cannot fully adapt to contemporary stressors, such as cyber threats, climate change, or population density. Each restart adds incremental risk, and these risks interact in ways that are nonlinear and unpredictable. The energy imperative adds ethical complexity. Fossil fuel dependence creates environmental risk and political vulnerability. Nuclear energy promises low carbon output, high reliability, and strategic autonomy. Governments face moral and practical trade-offs, prioritizing immediate energy security over potential long-term harm. The restart debate is not ideological alone. It is structural. Necessity and risk are inseparable. Check. Public trust is fragile. Even minor incidents, unreported leaks, procedural violations, or equipment malfunction can trigger disproportionate fear. Media amplification and social networks accelerate perception, influencing policy and investment decisions. Governments may downplay risk to maintain stability, but this often backfires, eroding credibility and increasing societal stress. Verified. Operational stress intersects with societal fragility. Staff shortages, maintenance errors, and procedural lapses are magnified by community scrutiny. Regulatory agencies face conflicting pressures, ensuring safety while meeting energy demand and political expectations. This creates a latent risk of compromise, where short-term objectives override systemic integrity. Global comparisons highlight vulnerability. Japan, with high population density and complex coastal infrastructure, faces unique exposure. France, heavily reliant on nuclear output, experiences systemic risk in grid management and reactor coordination. Emerging nuclear nations may lack mature regulatory oversight, compounding operational environmental, and societal risk. The simultaneous restart across multiple nations introduces a web of interdependent vulnerabilities that is unprecedented. The pattern is unmistakable. Environmental degradation, public health risk, and societal disruption are not random. They are the product of structural complexity, operational fragility, and human limitations interacting under stress. History, technical mechanics, and geopolitical reality converge to make these consequences inevitable if reactors are restarted without meticulous planning and continuous monitoring. Undeniable. Opportunity exists for those who understand these dynamics. Analysts, investors, policymakers, and environmental experts who monitor operational performance. Waste management, public perception, and geopolitical developments can anticipate both risk and influence. Informed awareness allows strategic positioning, not speculation, but deliberate preparation and insight. The controversy surrounding the restart is both political and systemic. Public protest, litigation, and opposition are symptoms of deeper structural tension. The collision between energy necessity and societal risk. Ignoring these signals increases operational fragility. Engaging with them, understanding, anticipating, and incorporating them into decision-making is essential for resilience. The next part will explore long-term economic, technological, and energy market consequences, including how reactor restarts influence global energy pricing, investment flows, and the balance between nuclear, fossil fuels, and renewables. It will also analyze emerging patterns of geopolitical leverage that arise from these decisions. Part 3 explored environmental health and societal consequences. Part 4 examines the long-term economic, technological, and energy market impacts of restarting reactors once considered too dangerous to operate. Because the restart is not a local issue, it is a global systemic event with ripple effects across markets, technology, and geopolitics. The economic dimension is immediate and complex. Restarting reactors influences electricity prices, industrial output, and government budgets simultaneously. Energy-intensive industries, from manufacturing to digital infrastructure, are highly sensitive to supply fluctuations. Even minor operational delays create volatility in production costs, which cascades into broader markets. Countries that rely heavily on nuclear energy for industrial competitiveness gain short-term stability, while those dependent on imports face rising costs and exposure to external risk. Investment flows are significantly affected. Capital moves toward energy systems perceived as reliable, low-carbon, and scalable. Nuclear energy fits this profile, especially when fossil fuel volatility increases. However, investors also account for operational risk, regulatory uncertainty, and public perception. Restarting reactors simultaneously in multiple nations creates both opportunity and systemic fragility. Liquidity and capital are concentrated where perceived risk is low, but underlying structural risk is rising. Verified. Technological impacts are equally profound. Reactor restarts necessitate modernization, updated control systems, advanced safety protocols, and integration with smart grids. This drives innovation in nuclear engineering, energy monitoring, and emergency response technologies. Yet retrofitting aging infrastructure is not seamless. Compatibility issues, training gaps, and software integration challenges amplify operational risk. Technology becomes both a solution and a vector for failure, highlighting the dual nature of progress under pressure. Energy market dynamics shift globally. Fossil fuel demand may decline slightly in nations restarting reactors, influencing oil, gas, and coal pricing. Simultaneously, global energy interdependence ensures that changes propagate across borders. Countries exporting fossil fuels experience revenue fluctuations. Regions reliant on imports encounter cost spikes. Nuclear restarts are therefore not only domestic energy decisions, but instruments of international economic influence. Undeniable. Geopolitical leverage emerges as a structural consequence. Nations capable of maintaining stable nuclear output gain negotiation power in trade, security, and diplomacy. Access to technology, fuel supply, and operational expertise becomes a strategic asset. Conversely, nations dependent on external energy or technology face heightened vulnerability. creating asymmetric relationships where energy output defines influence. History confirms this pattern. Control over energy equates to geopolitical power, amplified in times of scarcity or crisis. Operational risk interacts with economic pressure. Governments and corporations are incentivized to prioritize output over caution. Subsidies, contracts, and political deadlines accelerate restarts, often compressing safety margins. Markets reward immediate production, but systemic fragility grows quietly. Small operational errors can amplify, triggering supply disruptions, financial losses, and reputational damage. Those who monitor system integrity, not only output, gain critical advantage. Insurance and liability frameworks add another layer. Restarting reactors introduces exposure to potential environmental damage, public health claims, and cross-border legal action. Countries and corporations bear contingent liability that is difficult to quantify. Markets factor in risk, but perception often dominates over structural analysis, creating opportunity for those who understand underlying realities. Public perception and societal trust continue to influence economic outcomes. Fear and controversy affect energy consumption, investment sentiment, and political stability. Communities near reactors demand transparency, accountability, and stringent oversight. Ignoring these pressures can create operational bottlenecks, legal challenges, and policy reversals, amplifying systemic stress. Environmental constraints further influence economic and technological dynamics. Water usage, thermal pollution, and waste management require continuous investment. Compliance costs are significant, particularly for aging infrastructure being restarted. Nations that underfund safety or maintenance may realize immediate cost savings, but increase long-term risk financially and politically. Check the restart also accelerates technological adoption. Smart grids, AI-based monitoring, and automated safety systems are increasingly deployed to manage complexity. These innovations reduce certain risks, but introduce new ones. Software failure, cyber attacks, and human-technology interface errors. The more reactors that come online simultaneously, the higher the probability of system-wide stress interactions. Global energy markets react to perception as much as production. Confidence in nuclear reliability influences trading, futures pricing, and investment flows. Volatility increases in response to operational uncertainty, public protest, or geopolitical tension. Markets that appear stable may conceal hidden fragility, a systemic risk layer. Invisible to casual observation but critical for long-term analysis. Verified. The cumulative impact of operational, economic, technological, and geopolitical factors is profound. Restarting Fukushima-era reactors simultaneously across multiple nations introduces interdependent risk that is unprecedented. Each reactor, each country, each operational decision contributes incrementally to systemic exposure. Small errors or unforeseen events propagate, magnified by scale, complexity, and interconnectedness. For governments, corporations, and investors, the lesson is clear. Anticipate fragility. Monitor system-wide interdependencies and act strategically. Energy production is not merely a technical problem, it is a systemic, geopolitical, and economic challenge. Misjudgment can create cascading consequences affecting markets, communities, and international relations simultaneously. At the societal level, controversy is inevitable. Restarting reactors touches on public memory, environmental ethics, and trust in institutions. Protest, litigation, and scrutiny shape policy and operational decisions. Social pressure is a structural factor, not external noise. Ignoring it amplifies systemic fragility, while integrating it into planning reduces risk and enables more informed strategic action. In conclusion, the Fukushima restart cycle demonstrates the collision of necessity, risk, and systemic fragility, at operational and technical stress, environmental consequences, societal pressure, economic influence, and geopolitical leverage all interact to create a complex, high-stakes environment. The restart is not accidental. It is a predictable outcome of global energy demand, political pressure, and economic necessity. The takeaway is simple: awareness, preparation, and strategic positioning define who thrives and who suffers. Monitor energy outputs, regulatory decisions, and operational reports. Understand interdependencies and systemic risk. Anticipate market, geopolitical, and technological consequences. Position accordingly, not reactively. If this series gave you insight into the hidden forces shaping nuclear energy, markets, and global strategy, don't just watch and move on. Hit the like button. It helps this message reach others who need awareness. Subscribe now, because the next video will dive deeper, uncovering how nuclear restarts, technological innovation, and geopolitical leverage create both opportunity and systemic risk in the coming decade. The system is already in motion. Knowledge is power. Position yourself before the consequences become unavoidable. Stay alert, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next breakdown.